And now, the Rink Rap podcast from Forever Blue Shirts, talking all things New York Rangers hockey. Here's your host, Jim Cerny.
What's up, Blue Shirts faithful? Welcome to the latest edition of the Rink Rap podcast. I am Jim Cerny. Thanks for hanging out with us. We cracked August. We are literally just a month away from some real hockey. Actually, real hockey is coming because now we start the regular season in September as well. It's not just training camp, but the Rangers, for the first time in 101 seasons, are going to play a game in the month of September that actually counts for the upcoming season. So whatever, there's a lot to get to, and we're going to do exactly that. And right off the hop, really pleased to welcome aboard Hart Levine from PuckPedia. He's their founder. I could use the word capologist, right?
Why not?
You're the dude. He's the dude over at PuckPedia, the brains behind it all. And he joins us here for a few minutes to kick off Rink Rap this week. So thanks for joining us, Hart.
Thanks so much for having me, Jim. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get into Rangers and some of the wild stuff that's been going on in the NHL this year, and maybe where things like the finances of the league and the teams are going, and contracts and all that, we'll get to all that. I am so psyched to have you on just to find out a little bit about the journey, right? Because you started back in 2018 with PuckPedia.
That's right. Yep.
So you got to walk me through that lead up to 2018, saying, "Oh, this is going to be a great idea," and then did you ever imagine that it would be all this that it is today?
I guess I had hoped, but I wouldn't say I thought I had a great idea at the time. I thought, I thought there was a gap of a type of site that was missing. At the time, people in my life that were hockey fans found the existing sites a little intimidating, or that were hard to find what they're looking for. I also found that you had to switch between a whole bunch of different sites and that they weren't really interactive. So really, I just thought, I love hockey, I love this area, I'll just build a site that I want to use, and hopefully a few other people want to check it out. So yeah, I didn't think I had the most genius idea. I thought I had a idea for something that I wanted to use, and then just maybe if I was lucky, some other people would check it out too. And it grew pretty quickly, and then it was growing, but not obviously at the size it is now. And then in the last couple of years, obviously it's grown even more. And I think it's good that it, for some people, they maybe have discovered it in the last couple of years, but it's something that we've been working on now, going on 8 years, and tweaking and adjusting and adding. So it does feel like kind of mature from a website, not a website that just launched. But we still have a lot of things we're tweaking and a lot of things we're adding. So yeah, it's always evolving.
Yeah, it's super cool. And of course, you referenced a couple of years ago, that was the big explosion for PuckPedia. As we know, the competition kind of, or the big competition kind of went out of business, and everybody, all of a sudden, people from teams, from agents, throughout the league, us in the media, fans, all of a sudden everybody's coming to you. Was that at all intimidating? It's what you want, right? But at the same time, you're like, uh-oh, there's no flying under the radar here, right?
Yeah, be careful what you wish for, right? No, I mean, really, a lot of the work on the site is the same amount of work to keep it updated and accurate and have cool features, whether there's 5 people on it or 5 or 10 million at the same time, right? So
right.
The biggest thought at the time was it's really exciting to be able to show what we're doing to a much bigger audience, and have people give us a chance. I think the part then that felt like pressure was, okay, there's this whole audience that maybe hasn't checked us out, or if they did, it was infrequently. Now they're really counting on us. There's a lot of pressure to not just be content with what we had, but really build out even more and make it bigger and better as quickly as possible, so that the audience that was checking us out would stick, and we could keep growing the audience. So we built out our new Puck GM feature, which is our interactive roster tool, pretty quickly after we had more attention, and got an initial version out, and we've continued to update it and adjust and make that better over the years. There was a few other little features or data points that were kind of gaps that we quickly filled right away. And again, then we just keep adding more and more to that. So I would say ultimately it was exciting to to have more people, check out all the hard work, and also kind of get more of like, for every new feature or thing that we change, just getting more people looking at it and enjoying it, just is really exciting. And people are not shy with their feedback and comments. So that's
Yeah.
also helped too. Like,
Yeah.
whereas before, maybe if we had something that looked a little funny, or like maybe a weird formatting thing, or if we were just missing something, we may not hear about it, is definitely, and now we definitely hear about that kind of thing right away, which is great.
So I'm going to date myself a little bit with this story, but it relates to a question I'm going to ask you. So way back in the day, before my days broadcasting for the Islanders or working for the Rangers, which happened down the road, this was a young reporter. I was doing a local radio show in New York, and I was at the arenas and doing my interviews and just hustling, right? Didn't figure a lot of people outside of the handful that listened to the show might have even known who I was. I remember kind of my welcome to NHL type moment was being in the Rangers press room in Madison Square Garden, and you're at that still early stage of your career, and Neil Smith comes by, who's the GM then. That's where I said I'm going to date myself a little bit. And he hits me on the back. How you doing, Jim? Hey, I listened to the show on Friday, and he starts referencing something. I'm like, oh shit! I remember going home saying to my wife, I haven't exactly made it in this business yet, but that was a pretty cool moment right there, So obviously, it's a setup for a question to you. Was there a moment for you like that? Obviously, you get, as you said, a lot of feedback from fans and followers and all that. But what about from inside the league? Was there a moment where you said, oh shoot, this so and so, this agent, this player, this team, whatever, like they're really paying attention to what I'm doing here?
There's been many of those moments, but I guess because we've been around for so long,
Yeah.
had some of those like earlier on or at various stages, and
Right.
where teams are mentioning that they use a site, or the team sometimes release those videos of kind of behind the scenes, and we see the website up on someone's laptop,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Those are always been very exciting. There was a moment, in the first year or two, when the Hockey News put out their most powerful people in hockey edition,
Yeah.
and they were referencing our agent leaderboard, and
Yeah.
where the agents ranked in terms of kind of who they called the most powerful. Again, that was pretty exciting, because the Hockey News has been around for forever. So there's been a lot of those moments kind of going through. I'd say, in recent time, we launched our podcast just over a year ago now.
Yeah.
And that's also, as like you do the podcast, you're recording, it feels very intimate, and then you kind of forget that anyone's ever going to see it, right? And so, I'd give my opinions on, this is a good move, this move doesn't make sense. And then I did start to hear from some front office people like, oh, I listening to your podcast, and I liked how you explain this, or your opinion on that. And then that's where I would think to myself, oh man, I didn't think anyone was listening to this. And
Yeah.
now, like, I have to think back, was I too harsh on a team or an agent or something? And because now I know I might actually have to like answer for it.
Yeah, well, that's exactly, and you know what? That's like part two of the question. Is exactly what I was thinking as you were saying that. Was, did you ever get the flip where somebody said, hey man, just reaching out, like, what are you thinking? Or like, I know I
have
had
had
that.
that with
A PR director once reached out to me and said, and you're right. You're like, oh yeah, I'm not in a void here, with what I'm saying.
Yeah, I had one couple years ago where like I broke down some moves that a team made, and I certainly like implied that they didn't do the most optimal way of managing their cap, right? That they made some
Yeah.
moves that did like they left something on the table, and their capologist, who I had quite great relationship with, reached out and pointed out like, well, you missed like this. What you said is technically right, but you missed this one nuance, and like maybe you could add that nuance so it doesn't look like I'm doing a terrible job, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that the owner doesn't see it or something. And it was a fair, like I did miss a little bit of nuance, and I added that context. And again, like my point was kind of everything now. This is kind of the best that they did. My broader point was that they had gone back and done something differently, like earlier, then they would have been in a better spot today. So I did add that context, but yeah, it was interesting hearing from a league, like a team capologist, that could you add a little nuance here so that, like the owner or someone doesn't think I'm doing a bad job.
Right, exactly. It's funny, and this is a little tangent. Cam Hope, I don't know if you're familiar with Cam. He used to be the capologist for the Rangers during part of Glenn Sather's tenure as general manager, and he was the one that see him when I was working for the Rangers. You'd see Cam, and he's like the happiest guy on the face of the earth, right? Every day was a great day for Cam Hope. And, you'd ask, how you doing, Cam? Oh, living the dream, man. I work in the NHL. I'm living the dream. Except when it got to like a week or two before trade deadline or free agency, one or the other. And you'd see him, he'd be shaking his head. He'd start like, my gosh, my job right now, Glenn wants to make all these trades and he doesn't realize that there's a salary cap these days. And, I gotta, I got to tell them, no, we can't do that. Or if we do it, we've got to do this. And I just remember it's just a funny capologist story. I'm like, like the happiest guy on the face of the earth. But there were like a few weeks out of the year where his life was just like hell.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Right.
Especially in those early days of the cap.
Right. Where not everybody quite got it. And there's a lot of pressure on him. And you had Glenn at the time, he had done, for 20 odd years or 30 years, he had done things this way.
Right.
And you couldn't do it this way anymore.
Right.
So anyway, just a fun story to share. So pretty wild off season, right? Free agency was free agency, except for the fact that all the top free agents, and even right before free agency officially opened, the top guys then, everybody pretty much got, signed beforehand. Do you think this is going to be the way of business moving forward in coming years? Teams, especially now with cap is going up, something we're no longer in the flat cap era, so it keeps going up. Do you think that teams are going to be more aggressive about signing guys earlier, re-signing guys earlier, making sure that guys stay with them, as opposed to ever reaching July 1st? I shouldn't say ever, but in a bigger ever.
I mean, I think that teams would certainly try, but I think what players and their agents are seeing is that with the cap increasing so rapidly at a rate we have never seen before, it's pretty tempting to go to the market, right? Or at least go to like a few days before July 1st and get paid market prices. Like, look at some of these big RFAs that signed, and even some UFAs. Like, if they had signed a year ago, they were going to get a lot less. And so I do think, that's going to lead to, again, not like, despite teams trying, I do think that will lead to more players getting to free agency, or kind of to the verge of free agency. And also the other trend is, in the fall, we have the max contract length dropping from 6 years with the new team or 7 years with your own team. But we're also seeing the trend now where these players are signing shorter deals, again, recognizing that they can get, if it's a shorter deal, they can get back to the market with a much higher cap. And so because we've gone through a really long era where most players sign like 8 years or 7 years, right? We had so many long-term deals, both for RFAs and UFAs. And it takes time for that to all work through, but that just means that there's way less free agents available. And you get to this free agency and this free agent class, which was, everyone says is pretty weak. Even the players and the agents involved in this year's class admitted it was weak. That, again, that's a combination of some of the bigger names that are already signed, but also just so many years of long-term deals. You just have less guys coming up every year. And so, again, it's going to take some time to work through. But I think, in the coming years, where we have more players signing for 2, 3, 4, 5 years instead of 7 and 8 year deals, we'll just have more guys coming up every summer, and by definition, then more bigger name guys. And so I think that's just gonna put pressure to have a bigger free agency period. Whereas this year, I think we're just kind of at the tail end of that, all those years of long-term deals, a flat cap, guys always wanting the security of having a spot and extending earlier. I think we're kind of slowly moving out of that and into this new era.
Yeah. And again, the flat cap played a big role in that too, because, when it's staying like this and you can guarantee yourself, 7, 8 years at X amount or whatever, that's a pretty hard thing to turn down, because you don't know that the caps, one day is eventually going to get like this, or when that one day is going to be. So, you can see the whole mindset changing.
Exactly. Yeah. Players, I mean, there were really good players in the flat cap era, really good players that ended up having to sign for, like 1 or 2 year deals that way less than you would think that they were worth even at that time,
Right.
just because there was no spot, there was no cap space available. And now we have way more teams with cap space. There's just like a lot of money left in the system. We also keep in mind like the cap right now is artificially much lower than it should be, because the league and the PA agreed to these cap numbers in advance. They've stuck with it like for this coming season, but and last season as well. But if you look at the formula of where revenues are, the cap should be significantly higher. So much so that, because the players are guaranteed 50% of revenues for this last season, players are going to get an extra 6% or so top up on whatever their contract says. So if a player had a $5 million contract, they're going to get a check for an extra 6% because they have
Yeah.
to get paid 50%. All that means is that and now we have a new TV deals coming. So all together, that means that the cap is artificially low, and therefore we're going to have an even bigger cap increase coming. So, potentially even next season, there's a number that was agreed to, but if they see where things are going with revenues and continuing to have to cut these checks to pay out the remainder to players, I think that should incentivize teams to have a higher cap. And then even if not, like we only have one more year where that number's fixed, and then it is going to go based on league revenues with the formula they have. So I mean, we're looking at a cap in 2, 3, 4 years that's going to be closing in on close to 150 million.
Which is almost inconceivable for anybody that's worked in, hockey as long as I have, and certainly all your years doing it too. I mean, it's incredible how it's taken off. What about the offer sheets? So I have people saying, this is the greatest thing ever. We love this. And then it's going to kill the game, and I'm like, oh, I don't know about the extremes here, but what's your thought on it? Do you think that this is going to be a trend because there is more space, up to the ceiling? And it's going to, I think for sure, we've already seen that it's going to pull up also, from the floor. A third pair defenseman is going to benefit from, a guy at the top end making a lot of money too. I think it's going to pull everybody up. But do you see the offer sheet in particular after we saw the Carlsson offer from Philadelphia? What do you think it does to the game, to the overall business moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really agree that it pulls all the salaries up, because, like I mentioned, players are guaranteed 50% of revenues no matter what. So whether that's going to 36-year-old, like goalies signing in Toronto, or it's
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
RFAs, in Anaheim, the players are getting 50%. So things like offer sheets or these giant contracts or whatever, it's not inflationary. It's not driving salaries up. It's just a redistribution of who gets the money, right? So I mean, I think that these, like, especially the young superstars or almost superstars or potential superstars in their early to mid 20s, if you think about like teams should be giving contracts for what a player is about to do over that term. Those are the players that are going to provide the most on ice value, right? And so
Right.
if it shifts money to players that are 23 to 25 on a 3 to 5, 7 year deal, I mean that teams would be wise to give the money there and less to the 33-year-olds or 37-year-olds or
Right.
or whatever. So it's just a redistribution. I think it's great for the interest in the sport and the game. I mean, one of the most popular sports is the NBA, and the viewership numbers are okay, but it's all the surrounding intrigue and trades and speculation and content that goes on that really drives interest in the league. And so I think like having offer sheets happen is great. It's great, great for the interest in the league. And I mean, I was surprised to see the Carlson one, just because typically, like at the higher range of players, like it's sort of an automatic match for teams. I think
Right.
because they gave so much more than you might have expected, it probably did give Anaheim some pause. I think what we'll see more of, though, potentially, is like the Barrett Hayton one and the two to the Oilers, where they're a little bit more targeted. There's a little bit more nuance to it, right? Like the Hayton one was really interesting because he was only 1 year from UFA. When you match an offer sheet, you can't trade a player for a year. So now now that they match, like they have him and they will not be able to trade him. And so either they sign him to a new contract, which seems unlikely considering there seems to have been a bit of tension. They did file for arbitration against him, which was rare, or
Yeah.
he just walks as a free agent. So,
Right.
that's kind of a unique spot and kind of in that mid range. The Oiler one, obviously, St. Louis Oilers was very targeted, 2 offer sheets at the same time, again, kind of in that middle compensation range. So while it was surprising, and I think, maybe we will see more of those big name ones, the big money ones, to me, I think the obvious place is to see a lot more targeted where there's some nuance, whether it's a cap situation or like the double at the same time, or it's 1 year from UFA. I think those like more targeted ones is what we'll definitely see more of. I should also point out that like we hear so much about the offer sheets that are signed, but don't forget like just the threat of offer sheet and potential offer sheets causes a lot of other contracts as well. Like Pavel Minchikov, and we put this out, on Twitter as well.
Yep.
Like he had offer sheets presented to him. He would not have received that contract that he got from Anaheim had he not received offer sheets like ready to go. So while that one doesn't get marked on PuckPedia as like an offer sheet, that contract was driven by an offer sheet. And then I think the Ranger example, Keandre Miller, he had agreed, to an offer sheet with Carolina. He had signed the piece of paper yet, which allowed the flexibility, but he was ready to sign an offer sheet with Carolina. And then they worked out a different trade. So again, like those two, again, they're not marked as an offer sheet on PuckPedia, but without the mechanism of an offer sheet, those players would not have those contracts, or at least in Keandre Miller's case, he would not be in Carolina right now had there not been an offer sheet ready to go. So yeah, I think we're seeing more of it, and I think we'll continue to see more.
Yeah, it's interesting. Rangers are in an interesting situation next off season when we look ahead to 2027. And I just was writing about this today. There are 3 players they have to make decisions on, length of contract, longer term or shorter term bridge. One is Gabe Perreault, a first round pick, who you'd have to think that they are a little bit concerned, could be targeted for an offer sheet. Because of his pedigree. We'll see how he does this season. He's just coming off his first season in the NHL, but his rookie contract is done at the end of this upcoming season. He's a guy that to me is intriguing. I think Will Cuylle is an interesting guy, and it kind of goes to your Hayton example a little bit about targeting maybe somebody that's in the middle who's a good player, but the Rangers want to keep him at a certain contract because if you're paying him X, then, what does Gabe get? Or, what is a guy that's, at that next level above him, maybe skill wise or top 6 wise, if Cooley's in the middle 6, whatever. But Perreault to me is intriguing. Cuylle, who will be a free agent 2 years ahead of unrestricted free agency next summer, coming off a bridge deal, is really intriguing. And then the third name I'll throw at you, not to burden you too much here, is I think their biggest decision was with Braden Schneider, right? I felt like they kicked that one, right? I feel like they kicked that decision down the road a little bit here because I don't feel like they know yet. Is he a long-term answer? Or I don't know about him, so, he's a restricted free agent again at the end of the season, but he's unrestricted in 2028. So they have a massive decision to make there too. So I know I threw 3 different examples at you all at once, but love to get your take or your opinion on those 3.
Yeah, I think you identified those are big decision points. I mean, maybe we go in reverse order, but yeah, Schneider to me, it certainly didn't seem like a vote of confidence. I think the player though is pretty happy to take a 1-year deal at a good number and feel like if he takes a step forward or just keeps getting the kind of minutes that he's gotten, even if he's a number 4 defenseman, like in a year or two, those guys are going to be, $6 million defenseman, right? So he's probably feeling pretty good that he's got some options ahead of him here now. But for me, yeah, he signed a 2-year deal and then a 1-year deal. Like the contracts are kind of getting shorter after his 3-year entry level deal. Again, no inside info, just kind of looking at the tea leaves. I wouldn't be shocked if he's traded, by next summer, right? Like that seems like they're not ready to make that commitment. Or if they do make that commitment, I think like the next contract is obviously like I don't see them doing another 1-year deal, right? And walk him to free agency. No, it seems like either trade him or like let's go. Well, he's 24, so he doesn't necessarily need like a 7 or 8-year deal because he'll be 25 next year. But I'm sure he'd if he's going to sign there, it's got to be like a 3 or 4-year deal at least, right? So I think there's to your point, a real big decision to make there, and they've done quite a bit of surgery on their defense. Like it looks pretty different now, and where he slots in will be different, and whether maybe less minutes, but the play improves. Like maybe see what that does to his value, right? Or maybe he does end up like back to where he was on that depth chart last season and playing quite a bit. So I think there'll be a lot to see there. To your point on Perreault, like, yeah, these are the kind of players coming out of their entry level deals where, you know, they're typically ones where teams are now trying to get locked up. I mean, look at some of the deals like Carolina signed with Jackson Blake, you know, and Logan Stankoven. Right now, they look like huge bargains. When they signed, I mean, they'd shown some flashes, but we weren't quite sure yet, like what they'll be. I mean, I think a Gabe Perreault, I don't think he's, you know, again with his pedigree, I don't think he's like going to just jump at the first offer, but that's a type of player like right now would be a good time to try to get him locked up to an extension before he really pops. And so again, you're gonna have to pay for that to make it worth his while to not sign now. But like, if you believe in this player and they've invested in him, like now would be a good time to try to go to him and get him to sign. Similar to like a Vlasic in Chicago, right? Like they signed him long term after 40 or 50 games. Now that he hasn't really taken that step forward, and maybe that contract doesn't look like the steal it looked like, but it's not bad. Like he's a contributing,
Right.
you know, NHL defenseman, and that contract at that age, like that's not going to hurt you. So, yeah, I think that so different than Schneider because they're not as long in the journey with Perreault, but I think that's a decision, and to me, if they believe in the player, they should be trying to put the full court press to get him extended now because it's going to be a lot more expensive next summer if he's a regular and even just takes his per game rates and increases them slightly. But then now he has a full season and a half in the NHL with that pedigree. I think like that's going to be expensive. And then Cuylle, yeah, like, you know, again, coming off the bridge deal, but I think they obviously like what they've seen from him.
Yeah.
And I think he has some options. So that might be a player where, again, they maybe go to this summer or wait to see where he goes next year. But they do have some, unlike Schneider, they do have a little bit more runway with him. You know, and they can see what he becomes. But that's the type of player, depending on what kind of cap commitments the Rangers make, he could be an opportunity target next summer, right? So you don't want to mess around with that, as we've seen. So yeah, I think you identified the three players that I'm sure there's a lot of discussion in the front office there about them.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, again, we don't know 100% what the salary cap's going to be in 27, 28, you know, looking down the road. But, you know, I think you want to get Cooley's. They're thinking of him specifically. I don't think you want him, like, 1-year deal doesn't make sense. Like, they really seem bought in with Cuylle. Like, I think they're bought in with him as a player. He's a guy that might be a letter wearer at some point and is going to be there. They want him to be one of the pillars moving forward through this retool. So yeah, I see him as a different situation from Schneider, but I still see, you know, somebody coming after him. You know, if he has another 20-goal season, you know, especially in a third line role, you know, that'd be three straight 20-goal seasons. You know, he's going to make, he's going to get a good raise on that 3.9 million AAV, right? But you would think that it would cost, as you pointed out, cost the Rangers less if they get it done sometime this season or, you know, in next off season. They certainly don't want to walk him into 1 year away from UFA.
Yeah, and I think where the uncertainty is, and that's maybe what could lead to a deal or not, depending on each side feels, is like he has two almost identical seasons, right, of 20 goals and around 40 points. If he has a third season like that, you know, that's who he is. He's like a 20. You know, you don't see players, you know, that would be his. He'd have 4 full seasons in the NHL in his mid-20s. 3 almost identical. Like, it's unlikely then you take a big jump or something, right? Like, it happens, but it's rare. But if he does take a jump here, you know, then you see, okay, then people are thinking about the potential on where he could go, and he has not potentially hit his ceiling, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's where there's maybe an opportunity to get a deal done, because if the Rangers believe in him and his side is thinking, well, maybe I am just a 20-goal, you know, 40-point guy, and they're going to pay me like a 25-goal, 60-point guy, like I should take this deal now, right?
Right.
You know, so that's where both sides have to think about, like, who is he and what are the potential outcomes versus, like, for the season, if he takes a step forward or just has another identical season.
Right. And just going back to Schneider, the thing, you know, and you kind of touched on it where you said, you know, well, he had to be pretty happy. He got a pretty nice raise this year. He more than doubled his salary. You know, he's up to $5.5 million this year. But you also touch on the other point is that with Jersey coming in, Schneider, slots back down. He's on that third pair where, you know, last year he played up a lot more when Adam Fox certainly was hurt. He played up. It didn't go so great for him. But yet he got this $5.5 million. So I wonder, and there's no right or wrong answer to this, and we don't know because, we're not in the head of teammates or the organization or whatever. But your top pair left defenseman is Vlad Gavrikov, who signed for $7 million a year, and certainly is a superior defenseman to Braden Schneider. But Schneider's at $5.5 million. What's it going to take to lock him up for him to say, I'll sign up, whatever it is, 3, 4, 5 year deal with the Rangers here. What if he's at $7 million? What if that's the number? That's the thing about the contracts going up. Third pair defenseman now gets this. It used to be no way would you pay that third pair defenseman $7 million, but now he's going to make the most as your top pair left defenseman. You just wonder what kind of headaches and gymnastics here, Chris Jury and company, just using them as an example here, are going to have to deal with the mental gymnastics of, balancing all that out.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, but it really, you have to put in context when the contracts were signed, right? And so Gavrikov, signed that last year, when the cap was going to be 95.5. Schneider's next deal will be when the cap's at least 113, if not more, right? So,
yep.
As a percentage of the cap, you kind of have to factor that in. And that's where I do think some teams, like, they get caught in this, like, we have a internal cap and the player can't exceed that. And that ends up like messing things up because, like, you can't get a deal done where, like, things change. Like, just because your neighbor's house sold for something 3 years ago, you have this same house, like, your house is going to probably sell for more. That's just like prices go up, right? The market has moved up.
Right.
So yeah, I take that point, but I'd also say, like, it has to go in the context of what the cap was. But to your point, like, I think if Schneider had signed like a 4-year deal this summer, you're probably talking around 6 or so, right? And I could see, again, from his perspective, like, it's not that much more. Why do I want to lock in when I could hopefully have another good season and have a lot of leverage here 1 year from UFA, and then maybe that 6 becomes 6.5 or something, or it becomes more years, like, after this season. Yeah.
So we're going to let you run in just a little bit. Appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us, Hart. Just a quick thought from you on the Dorofeyev contract. Again, 7 years, $11 million AAV from the Rangers. He scored 72 goals the last 2 seasons. Obviously, a really good postseason, helping Vegas get to the final. Rangers give up a couple first-round picks for him. Like, they are all in on Pavel Dorofeyev. Just wondering where you felt about that, or what you feel about that contract in his age 25 season coming up here.
Yeah, that was definitely like a head turner at the draft when it happened.
Yeah.
I think that the question for them to figure out is, like, he put up those goals and points. A lot of it was power play production, right? And on a very specific spot on the power play. Like, will he be able to reproduce that with the Rangers? What will he do at 5-on-5 with the Rangers, and how does he fit in? And, like, I think that contract is not unreasonable for what he's produced. I guess my question would be more like, why is it the Rangers trading for him and giving him that contract? Like, that was my thought at the time, like, with where they are in their cycle right now, like, does it make sense to be, giving up those assets and committing to that contract to him? Now, I get that he's 25, not 31. But, they haven't made the playoffs recently, right? And if they have another down season this year, like, what are they trying to do? Are they going to try and sell off and, try and get a really good pick? Or are they trying to just, like, be in that mushy middle for the next few years and not make the playoffs, or make the playoffs and get bounced right away? So to me, a player like Dorofeyev, I don't think he's like a superstar. I don't think he's the reason why a team goes for, up several spots in the standings. I think he's a player that's a good player and will certainly help any team. I mean, he'll score. But to me, I'm just not sure, like, where the Rangers are in their cycle, if they were the right team to be giving up those assets in that contract for him.
Right. That's interesting. And you can draw a similar comparison in their rebuild from years ago, how things sped up once they signed Panarin. They didn't expect,
But
or
I would
maybe
say,
they
in
did expect.
fairness, I don't know if Dorofeyev is Panarin, right?
Right. And right. And that was my setup based on what you were just saying. You're like, yeah, listen, he's good. He's not Panarin. Panarin is up that upper echelon
Yeah,
and
and
worth
Panarin,
speeding
and
things up
again,
for.
Dorofeyev's 25. So is there more room to grow? Quite possibly. Panarin was a bit older, but he had the track record, and you knew like what you were getting. You knew it was worth it. That contract ended up, well, seemed high at the time, just from where contracts were. It turned out to be a bargain for pretty much
Yeah.
the whole length of that contract, right? And Dorofeyev basically signed for almost the same amount. So yeah, do you feel like you end up on a decent contract? And again, I think there's a decent chance that Dorofeyev lives up to this contract. My question would just be, but is that still was that the right decision for the Rangers to be the team to give up the assets and to have that contract for him? Because to me, I think where teams go wrong is just being stuck in that middle where they're, almost making the playoffs or kind of right in that area, make the playoffs, get bounced in the first round. I think about the Kings in that, in that category. And it's really hard to take that step. I mean, the Capitals get applauded for them trying to rebuild, on the fly or retool on the fly. They had that season a year ago where they were strong and made the playoffs, didn't really do much. And then you saw what happened this last year, right? So, and now they've made some more aggressive moves and look, it looks like they've added some good young core players and maybe they are building something, but it's really, really hard to do that. And what ends up happening usually is teams get stuck there. And after years and years and years of just kind of being in that middle, then eventually they have to sort of bottom out and they're kind of delayed that pain. So, I think the Rangers are a team with the resources and the fact that free agents are always going to want to go there and, players are willing to be traded there if they have protection. Like they have a chance to always do things a bit faster, but you got to make the right decisions and the team's got to really take a step forward. And they really haven't shown that, in the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, we'll find out, right? It's one of those. I'm a big believer in that. When you know,
Yeah.
so we'll know what when we know when we watch and we see it play out. I guess as you mentioned, mushy middle is the worst place to be in any professional sport, certainly in hockey. And the Rangers are a tough spot because you're locked into Igor in his prime and now into his 30s and everything. At 11 whatever to 11.5 billion a year and. So it's tough to completely step back and, tear it down to the studs, when you got a guy like that and Adam Fox making 9.5 million and, and they're in their prime years. I mean, I get it, but it's tough. And you're so spot on when you use the mushy middle phrase, because that's gotta be the biggest fear, not just for the Rangers, but for any team. You're like, oh man, we're stuck.
And like I said, it's not impossible for a team to sort of make some trades that are addressing, selling a little bit, but then adding for the future and
Right.
trying to turn things around without completely bottoming out. And like I think their Trocheck trade was very interesting, right? Because they got a really good defenseman. They got I think a pretty highly thought of prospect, right? So
Yep.
it's not necessarily taking a step back. I think that kind of a deal makes a lot of sense for them. And if they miss the playoffs again this year and they're bad, like I think Jersey would have a lot of value at the trade deadline, right? Where you could get more out of him,
Right.
get another prospect potentially. So they give themselves some options. I really like the Bjorkstrand signing because I think he's shown a lot more than what he did in Tampa, and I think he has the potential to either really outperform that I think he has the potential to really outperform that contract, and then you either, if you're a good team, like you sign him and potentially he's a part of the future, or if you're a bad team, like then you deal him, right, and you get an asset at the deadline. So I think like that contract makes sense. So they made some moves that I think are savvy and have a chance to work out. And so maybe they have a plan, and the plan is here's what we're doing, where it's a little bit of buying, a little bit of selling. Let's see what we have this year. But to me, it really will be determined this year. Like if they're not a playoff team again this year, even if they're close to the playoffs, but they're just not a playoff team this year, I think that really to then double down again with the trying to kind of retool on the fly, that's where you get into maybe some risk, right?
Awesome stuff. Hart, thank you so much for joining us. That's a lot of fun. I probably just crushed your afternoon here, but hopefully we didn't keep you too long. It was just, that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed the exchange.
Thanks so much for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And continued best of luck for, with PuckPedia and with the podcast and keeping your sanity, working with Keith, of course, on that podcast. That's a job in of itself.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.